Thank you for listening to the show on Really Big Something Channel. November 21st, 2017.
The Kuhner Report, presented by Kelly Financial Services.
Welcome in, folks. Good to be back with you here on a Tuesday in the city of Boston. And we are going to get into a whole lot of conversation today, and I want to tell you that it's going to start off with a note of concern for Republicans, and frankly, well, there should be. You know, Republicans have done little or nothing with regard to the promises made and promises kept. Yeah, the promises were made, but no, the promises weren't kept on Obamacare, so far on tax cuts and tax reform, so far on building the wall, so far on a whole range of issues, including substantial reform of immigration policy, not just the wall itself. All we've had done has been done by executive order for the most part. Now, we have done some work, Congress has, and the President signed bills regarding the VA and giving veterans options other than the VA to go for medical care. So that's one good thing, but obviously that's not controversial. But the Republicans have laid back and not done their job on what they said they would do for the American people if they got the majorities. And they're twiddling their thumbs. As Lindsey Graham said, if we don't get the tax reform and tax cuts passed, we're toast. Jeff Flake said if Donald Trump has his way, the Republican Party is toast. So I guess it's coming from both sides of the Republican aisle, so to speak. Scott Rasmussen is well known for very powerful opinion polls that he does that come out and are used as a guideline, as a marker for where we are politically in this country. And we're glad to have him with us. He's the founder of Rasmussen Reports. And Mr. Rasmussen, how are you today?
Well, I'm doing great today. I think your note of concern is appropriate. You put it in the right context. You know, Republicans spent 7 years saying, elect us and we will repeal Obamacare. That was repeated time and time again. And somehow, I guess, while they were busy doing all that promising, they didn't figure out how to do it. A lot of Republican voters very discouraged. And right now, for the first time, we're seeing a possibility that Republicans could lose control of the U.S. Senate in 2018.
Well, it's not beyond the realm of the possible, as you're suggesting, and I think the Republicans need a wake-up call, and even moderates in the Republican Party like Lindsey Graham understand that. I remember when the House Majority Leader, Kevin McCarthy, in 2014, after a big win by the Republicans, and they took control, was interviewed on cable news, one of the networks, and he was asked about 6 times, are you going to repeal Obamacare? And he kept deflecting the question. Finally, he said, when we have a good replacement that I can support, I'll repeal that and support for the replacement. And that was only 3 years ago, and for years before that, the Republicans were talking about repeal. Matter of fact, the House had, in fact, repealed something like 37 times Obamacare, and yet he was talking then, now that they had the power, of hemming and hawing and maybe not doing it, and they did not even have a plan in place to replace it. How irresponsible is that?
Well, it is, and I think, you know, part of the problem is the Republicans, many of them, never really want to deal with it, but the only reason the Republicans won such a big majority and had such a great election day in 2010 was because of their promise to repeal Obamacare. That was the issue of that election cycle. And it was a repeated promise. And, you know, right now, there's plenty of blame to go around. Some people say it's Donald Trump's fault because he's not providing good strategic legislative leadership. Some say it's Mitch McConnell or Paul Ryan, or you can go find lots of people to blame. But I think the way most voters are looking at it is pretty simple. We did our job. You told us if we gave you a majority, you would do these things. We gave you the majority, and you haven't done your part. And what we're starting to see are some signs that Republicans, that this is going to depress the Republican turnout a little bit, because why bother? There are a couple of Senate races very easily Republicans could lose in 2018. I think the greater danger comes in states that Donald Trump won big. You know, West Virginia, he won by 42 points. Places like Indiana and North Dakota, he won by about 20 points. And in those states, Republicans should be in a good position to pick up Senate seats from vulnerable Democrats. But if the Republican majority can't do anything and doesn't give them a reason to do so, those victories may slip away, And, we got this crazy situation down in Alabama where the Democrats may pick up a Senate seat there. There's some other possible risks along the way. And it all comes back to failure to keep promises.
Well, then we're talking with Scott Rasmussen of Rasmussen Reports. Then I guess the point I would make, Scott, is that the Republicans arguably need to have, putting aside the scandal in Alabama, just based on political ideology for the moment, a candidate like Roy Moore, candidates that Steve Bannon is promulgating, candidates who will stick to the message that elected Donald Trump in a massive upset, I think we'd all agree. The bottom line is that maybe the Republicans need to move further to the so-called nationalism of Donald Trump and the building of the wall and the immigration strengthening in terms of security, fighting Al-Qaeda, fighting what's left of ISIS, doing that overseas instead of here, going through maybe reform of the education system, giving kids choice in the inner cities, different things such as that the mainstream Republicans, McConnell and his crowd, are not apparently willing to do.
Well, I'm not quite sure that it's even as challenging as saying you have to embrace more of the nationalism or be more like Donald Trump. Republican voters all across the country for several years have been pushing these things, and there are some who would not be identified with the nationalist wing of the party, who still want to repeal Obamacare and still want to address these issues. These are people who voted for Donald Trump, some of them not enthusiastically, but because they thought that Hillary Clinton was going to be even worse. And I guess my message here is that these issues are pretty broad. What they're looking for, broad support among Republicans. They cut across both wings, and yet the frustration has been, and the reason there is such frustration with the establishment Republicans is because they talk a good game, they get elected, and then nothing happens. And it's just the great frustration that Republican voters feel.
Well, then let's go through some of the specifics, because we have people like, and of course not all of these are running, but in the Republican Party in the Senate, as it's presently constructed, Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski, Dean Heller in Nevada, and some of that crowd, Lindsey Graham for the most part, on domestic issues certainly, and John McCain, Jeff Flake, Mitch McConnell. These people seem to me to be Republican light, so to speak, rhinos as some people call them, Republicans in name only. What about that?
Right, and I think what those candidates or what those senators have in common is generally they buy into the Washington worldview that we need wise leadership from Washington to make the country run. We are the smart people who have to make these tough decisions so that the rest of you can gain from our benefit, from our wisdom, and live a better life. Most voters, most Republican voters especially, but most voters across all party lines believe that no, we're a free country. We are supposed to be in charge, and you, the politicians, are supposed to work for us. And it is this attitude that becomes different. When you talk about some of the candidates that whether it's Steve Bannon or others who bring in some challenges, what they're going to be doing is they're going to be saying to people, or they'll be presenting themselves to voters as saying, we're sick and tired of this gang in Washington telling us what to do. They're supposed to listen to us, and that's the message.
Now, you've got Dean Heller in Nevada, I mentioned. You've got Jeff Flake in Arizona. He's dropping out anyway. Those two states are pretty vulnerable. There are large immigrant populations in Nevada, for example. Arizona seems to be changing its makeup to some degree, has been a red state for the most part, but you know better than I, being in the polling field, but Arizona seems to be moving more into a kind of a neutral position. So those two states are pretty vulnerable, are they not?
Yes. Look, Dean Heller is the only Republican senator running in 2018 in a state that Hillary Clinton won. That, by definition, makes him at least somewhat at risk, somewhat vulnerable, and it is a state that Republicans have always thought they had a chance in and always fallen a little short, it seems, at the presidential level and other places. Dean Heller's position is not terrible, but he is certainly vulnerable. In Arizona, if Jeff Flake had stayed in the race, he would have lost. That's almost nothing is quite certain in politics, but it's about as close as you come. I think Arizona is going to be a very competitive state. If the political winds are heading against the Republicans, if there is not a reason for their voters to turn out in a big way in 2018, it's quite possible that the Democrats could pick up a seat there. And I should also mention, and I want to be very careful about saying this, but it's also possible that John McCain's seat could be open. Senator McCain has had health issues, and many have wondered if he was going to leave his seat. And if that happens, there would be 2 Senate seats up in Arizona, and it's conceivable Republicans could lose both.
Yeah, but the other side of that coin is that there were 34 seats in the Senate up in 2018, and as I understand it, as I recollect anyway, 24 of them are are Democrat at this point,
right.
Correct? So
correct. And
you can make the case that the Republicans could have a major. I realize in off-year elections when it's not presidential, the party out of power usually does well. But this might be an unusual year as regard to that.
Yes. In 2002, by the way, Republicans gained control of the Senate in a midterm election with a Republican in the White House. So it is not an impossibility. Obviously, that took place about a year after 9/11, and there were special circumstances. As you look at the map this year, there are 10 Democrats running in states that were won by Donald Trump. Some of them were narrow victories by Trump, and if you have a good Democratic incumbent, they should be safe. But there are people like Joe Donnelly, a Democratic senator from Indiana, a state that is very unusual to have a Democratic senator. And you have Joe Manchin in West Virginia, very popular. He's as conservative a Democrat as you're going to find. But Donald Trump won that state by 42 points, and having a D next to your name, being a Democrat in West Virginia, has become extraordinarily toxic. And so it's going to be I don't know who's going to win there. I don't know if Manchin keeps his job or not. But there are 5 seats in which where a Democrat is running, and Donald Trump won by at least 17 points. Those seats are pickup opportunities for Republicans. And if you were to handicap this, you would say, yes, the Republicans could come out of 2018 by gaining 2-3 seats, end up with a 55-45 Senate majority. It's also possible things could go the other way. And that's why these discussions and what the performance in the Senate over the coming months, that's why it's so important.
Well, and the thing is, they have to get this tax cut and tax reform bill done, and now Susan Collins is complaining because the individual mandates are being repealed, and I don't understand that because typically a Republican is going to say we ought to give people choice. Democrats like bigger government. Republicans typically, supposedly, don't. But she wants to force people to continue getting required to be getting insurance when maybe they don't want to do it. So, how can one even call her a Republican? Basically, in name only is how I see it.
Well, technically in the Senate, the only thing that's required to be a Republican is to vote for the Republican nominee to lead the Senate, and she does that.
Sure.
The issue of the individual mandate is a great example of how things get twisted around in Washington. The Congressional Budget Office says if you get rid of the individual mandate, you will throw lots of people off of Obamacare. In fact, you would be giving people the freedom to drop out if they want. And there are 15 million Americans who say that they would drop their current coverage if they were allowed to do so. You would be offering a benefit to those 15 million people. And I should point out, these aren't people who would be, they're not being irresponsible. The law as it's passed right now requires many of them to buy far more insurance than they need. So they'd like to buy some less expensive coverage. Maybe some catastrophic care coverage because they don't go to the doctor that often. But so this can be if you believe that people are responsible and capable of making choices for themselves, removing that mandate or at least greatly reducing it would be a positive thing. But in Washington, the people like Susan Collins, it's not.
We'll come right back with Scott Rasmussen of Rasmussen Reports. Folks, what do you make of the Senate race coming up in 2018? Are the Republicans facing the possibility of losing the majority in the Senate because of a do-nothing attitude by the leadership of the Republican Party in the Senate? What do you make of that? Are you frustrated with the Republicans in the Senate and how they've gotten basically nothing done? Our number to Boston is 617-266-6868. That's 617-266-6868, 1220. It is here on a Tuesday at the Voice of Boston, WRKO. Back we are. Good to be here at 1224. Mike Siegel for Jeff Kuhner. It's a pleasure to have with us Scott Rasmussen. You can reach him at scottrasmussen.com, SCOTTRASMUSSEN.com, and that's where he can be located. All right, the question is whether the Republicans are going to maintain control of the Senate. Initially, you would have thought no-brainer. 24 of the 34 seats up for election are Democrat incumbents. But now, because the Republicans have been a do-nothing party, it may be that they're in some trouble. Let's go to your calls for Scott Rasmussen. Tom in New Jersey. Tom, you're on the Voice of Boston, WRKO. Hello.
Hey, Mike. Thank you. Thank you for the American Eagle filling in for Jeff Kuhner. Yeah, I would like to ask both of you gentlemen, what is the difference between Harry Reid and Mitch McConnell? They're both, their sole function is the stonewallers in chief. I mean, Paul Ryan talks about all these things that went through Congress to improve our nation that come to Harry Reid's desk and they go there to die. I mean, this is like gangsterism, guys. Mitch McConnell has to go. Have we broke ground on the wall? Did we repeal and replace? And where are we going on tax reform? We're going where Mitch McConnell says we're going, which is nowhere. What do you think, guys?
I appreciate the call, Tom. Scott, I'm sure you know that that's a sentiment that is widespread among Republicans. The only thing I'd say about Harry Reid and Mitch McConnell is that McConnell is a courteous gentleman. Harry Reid is a street thug, but go ahead.
Well, and Harry Reid is now retired, and you're having Chuck Schumer there, but it's I think the difference right now in having a Republican majority versus a Democratic majority, and really a 1 or 2 seat majority in the Senate is virtually impossible to get a lot done with. But the difference comes down to one topic: judicial nominees. If the Republicans have the majority with Mitch McConnell or with anybody else in that position, Donald Trump's appointees to the Supreme Court and other places are very likely to get filled. If you have a Democratic majority, they will not. Beyond that, in terms of actually making things happen, not a whole lot of difference.
That's a very good point, and ironically, there's supposed to be a distinction between the two parties, and the leadership in the Republican Party is upset, frankly, because others are saying we want to make a change and move more toward the nationalism point of view. Arthur and Chestnut Hill.
If the Republicans do maintain control of the Senate in 2018, it is likely to be a Senate by the composition of the Republican caucus will be less friendly to Mitch McConnell and more friendly to the Republican base.
Excellent point, and that would be, I think, to the pleasure of many Republicans across this country. Arthur and Chestnut Hill, you're on with Scott Rasmussen. Go right ahead, sir.
Thank you very much for taking my call. Happy Thanksgiving to you both. And Scott, your point is well taken. I think that's why Mitch McConnell is trying to sabotage Roy Moore's election in Alabama. He knows that he would typically be somebody who would be opposed to Mitch McConnell. And after I listened to the Democratic candidate in Alabama, the guy's a complete result and a complete jerk. He's everything we don't want, and yet he'd rather have him elected than Roy Moore. It just, you know what? They betray us at every point.
Thank you for calling, Arthur. It's very interesting, because I'll just make real quick. McConnell was against and put millions of dollars into the campaign for Luther Strange in the primary. He didn't want Roy Moore under any circumstance, even before the scandal broke.
Right. And right now, Roy Moore is saying, Mitch McConnell hates me. The Washington Post did their investigation after I already wrapped up the nomination. Can you trust the Washington Post? And if you're running for office in Alabama, it's hard to imagine two better people to have against you than Mitch McConnell on the Washington Post. And I think one of the things that we have to remember is that despite all the baggage and all the scandals that are coming out around Roy Moore, people don't expect politicians to be role models or character references. I know it'd be better if they were all saints, but people tend to view somebody like Roy Moore as we're sending you to do a job, and that job is to get things done like repeal Obamacare and deal with immigration. And if he wins, it will be because of that fact.
I think also it's clear that when the evangelicals and conservative Christians in big numbers voted for Donald Trump, it wasn't because of his personal lifestyle. It was because of what he was going to offer the country. I've talked to many about that in that community.
Absolutely true.
And that's what they say. All right, ScottRasmussen.com is where you go to see what he's doing. Scott, great to talk to you. I appreciate your time, and thanks for the insight. We'll watch this closely.
All right. Thank you. Have a happy Thanksgiving.
A very happy Thanksgiving to you as well. Coming up to 12:30 at the Voice of Boston, WRKO. Welcome back in, folks. Good to have you with us on a Tuesday, 12:35 at the Voice of Boston, WRKO. Mike Siegel in for Jeff today. Good to have you with us. And I want to get to this absurd issue involving LeVar Bell, the father of the young fellow who was convicted, or was caught at least, shoplifting in China, a country you would not want to be caught doing anything criminally. You could wind up behind bars for a very long time. There's a fellow named Wendell Brown who was involved in a bar fight in China. Has still been there for 13 months. They won't let him go. So we'll get to that, but let me get to Bill in New Hampshire first of all. Bill, you're on the Voice of Boston, WRKO. Hello.
Hey, how you doing, Mike?
Good.
The reason I called, I was trying to get Mr. Rasmussen, but that's okay. One of the things that I don't trust now are polls. And one of the reasons for that is particularly during the primary season, there was a particular NBC Washington Post poll that came out. And, of course, it was talking about Trump and, presidency and stuff like that. And it said 890 people called. And the poll just did not seem accurate to me. So I downloaded the actual poll itself and all the paper that goes with it. And down below the 890 people called was the actual contacts, which were totally different and skewed toward the Democrats. And I'm like, why are you telling me what Democrats think about a Republican primary? It was like really crazy.
Yeah, there are polls that do that, and the president has pointed that out himself, that there was one poll where it was 24% Republicans. Well,
yeah, exactly.
Duh. Don't you think that's going to give you a certain result that you want?
Right. But the other thing is, what people are forgetting in all of this falderall about the, to me, spurious accusations against the Judge Moore down in Alabama because of the timing of it all, is the fact that the reason that people voted for Trump, and I talked to Democrats who voted for Trump, and why did they vote that way? Well, they voted that way because he said things that they thought that no one was talking about other than Trump. And I believe that the revolution underneath the covers against the elites in this country who run the country, the McConnells and all the Democrats, is going to flare again in the coming election.
No, there's no question. I think, frankly, the Roy Moore election is going to be very interesting. Now, as of now, Doug Jones, according to the last poll I saw, is leading 50-42, and many undecideds. But I think what just came out today is very, very powerful, because Roy Moore tweeted, and I've thought about this. In fact, I wrote a piece at WRKO.com. I hope people look at that. I write a piece there every week, and there's one there now at WRKO.com about the Roy Moore and Al Franken situations. But with Moore, one of my points was that the yearbook, my suggestion was that the yearbook that he allegedly signed on December 22nd, 1977, should be independently analyzed against his actual signatures by 3 separate acknowledged handwriting experts, none of whom know the other 2 are doing this, so that each one does it independently, and then you get the results. Let a third party be the one doing it, maybe a newspaper, maybe WRKO, whoever, and then get the results and see what those handwriting experts say. It's interesting now. Gloria Allred's an old friend of mine. I've known her for many years, but she has been asked for 7 days to turn over the yearbook for that purpose, and it has not been done yet. Now, that could turn this in Moore's favor, so we have to wait and see how that plays out. And I think that's going to be very interesting to watch. Let's get to Russ in Boston on this LeVar Ball situation. It's really unbelievable. And I'm going to get into it, but let me get your call first so you can lay out the groundwork. Go ahead.
Yeah. Mike, what really irks me about this, okay? This father who should be grateful and say thank you to Donald Trump that his son was freed, okay? And you have to think about this guy. He doesn't think that shoplifting is bad. It's a minor offense, okay? So what I want to know, was he in one of these cities where there was riots and he went and looted stores? I mean, is this what he taught his son, that shoplifting is fine? If you can afford something, just steal it, okay? I mean, what kind of a human being is his father? His father has to be a scumbag.
I agree completely about the point you're making. I don't know if I'd call him the name, but here's the point. Where does it end? First of all, this was expensive stuff. We're talking about Louis Vuitton. This is not cheap stuff, number one, and that doesn't make any difference anyway when it comes down to it. If you steal, a $5 purse versus a $500 purse, the act is still just as wrong and just as illegal. One might be petty larceny, one might be grand larceny, but nevertheless, it's wrong. But it's outrageous to me. The media are portraying this as Donald Trump being ungrateful, wanting too much credit by saying, well, I guess I should have left him in jail. Well, obviously he was being facetious about that, but nobody wants to talk about the fact that this father is condoning crime. He's condoning crime. Just because it's shoplifting, does that mean he should be able to shoplift a car? If there's a Maserati sitting out in the parking lot of a dealership, should you shoplift that? If the key is in the ignition, you turn the key and take off? I mean, where do you draw the line on shoplifting, Russ?
Mike, seriously, okay?
I mean that. Where's the line drawn on shoplifting? You could shoplift something worth $50,000.
Yeah. First of all, Mike, a decent father, if a kid's 6 years old and takes a candy bar in the store, what does he do? He brings the kid back. He says, here's this kid, my son took this, I want him to apologize for you. And then he gives the kid a little bit of a licking so he remembers not to do that again. But apparently this father is a loser. There's no question about it, because he didn't know what to do when his kid stole a candy bar. He said, great, son, why don't you take two? One for me and one for you.
The act is wrong, period, case closed. That's it, as far as I'm concerned. And when you justify a criminal act at any level, then you're justifying criminal activity. Shoplifting is absolutely a crime under any circumstance. By the way, in this country, you might get 30 days. You could get as much up to a year, depending on the state and the jurisdiction. It would depend on what the laws are in that state. But it's a misdemeanor. It's petty larceny, basically. I thank you for calling, Russ, and I appreciate it. I find this astonishing. And what I really find more astonishing is that the crowd over there at the left-wing media, like MSNBC, are actually saying that there might be racial overtones to this on the part of Donald Trump. Are they kidding? He's the one who called President Xi to talk to him to let these guys go. They made a mistake, let them go. And the son apologized with the other two basketball players. They all apologized. Now the father comes along, LeVar Ball, and acts as if Trump did nothing. I'll tell you this, if it had been maybe a Democrat president, maybe this guy's just a left-wing liberal, the father, and if it was a Democrat president, maybe he would have been so thankful. Who knows? Rob in Bedford, you're on with Mike Siegel for Jeff Kuhner at WRKO. Hello, Rob.
Hey, Mike, thanks for taking my call. I just see this as a part of the resist Trump, movement. No matter what the man does, he's wrong and he's racist, and you can easily see that. My 7-year-old and 11-year-old know not to steal, and it comes down to parenting. And I think Trump, what he tweeted was correct, and the reaction is unbelievable. If Obama did this, he would have been lauded. Trump does it, he's a racist. I mean, that's just the way it is.
Well, and that's what they say. But nobody in the left wing wants to talk about the father justifying shoplifting, that it's no big deal. First of all, you're talking about a totalitarian dictatorship, a country where they can do whatever they want to do. There's no criminal justice system. LeVar Ball, in case you didn't know that, maybe you're ignorant about that, but they were in a communist dictatorship. As I said, there's a fellow there right now who was in a bar fight, Wendell Brown. He's been held by the Chinese for 13 months. So if Trump didn't get involved, and it was Trump's relationship with Xi that got that done, because he gave him a call while he was there, or maybe spoke to him in person, and the president interceded. A president of that magnitude of a country of that size isn't going to intercede directly in a simple shoplifting case. He's going to let the court system, such as it is in China, take care of it.
Right. What I think, Trump cares about everyone, and the fact that he went to Xi and mentioned this to him to get the guys released was I don't know. I think it was a great act, and no matter what the man does, they're not thankful for it, and it's sad. And I think it just exposes the lib media even more. Makes me want to vote for Trump again in 2020.
I agree. Well, I'm gonna. I mean, there's no question about that. But Adam Schiff, this disingenuous, smug, arrogant member of the Intelligence Committee in the House, who couldn't care less about Hillary Clinton's corruption and getting paid off $130 to $145 million in the Russian Uranium One deal. He doesn't care about anything that she did, 11 crimes she committed that you could, under federal statutes, that you could articulate and enumerate. But he cares about the non-entity of the collusion with Russia by Trump. They can't even find it. Now he tweets about the LeVar Ball situation, quote, "How can someone in such a big office be so small?" End quote. Well, what Schiff is not getting is that the father was ungrateful. The father justified shoplifting. The Schiff want to justify. Why don't the left-wingers criticize the shoplifting comment by LeVar Ball, that he justifies shoplifting, that he justifies crime, that he justifies people going out and taking things that don't belong to them? Is that what LeVar Ball stands for? Bill in Sudbury, you're on WRKO, the voice of Boston, with Mike Siegel. Hello.
Hello, good afternoon. Of course, you're not really expecting him to come out and say, my kid's a rotten kid. Of course he's going to stick up for his son. That's what a father does.
No. Wait a minute. Back up a minute. I don't say he shouldn't stick up for his son. What you say is, my son made a mistake. He gratefully apologized, and we go on with our lives, and my son understands that you don't do those sorts of things. That's what you say.
The president has been trolled by the ultimate troll. Why is the president getting into an argument with crazy people on the sidewalk like this guy?
Okay, then you agree. Do you agree that the father, LeVar Ball, was condoning crime in that comment?
No, I don't. I think he was trolling the president, and the president took the bait and ran with it.
Well, wait a minute. Listen, I say things here, but I'm not going to troll people to antagonize them just to call. I'm going to say things that I believe. I'm not going to say things just to antagonize people without believing what I'm saying. I take him at his word. I think LeVar Ball believes that it's okay to shoplift. What do you make of that?
Well, first of all, I would say don't shoplift in a country where you're 4 feet tall.
How about not shoplifting at all? Bill, do you justify shoplifting in Sudbury?
No, I'm just saying that if you're 4 feet taller than everybody else in the place, don't shoplift there. Of course it was stupid and foolish. Louis Vuitton sunglasses, that could be $800. I understand the seriousness of it. I'm just not surprised that this father is kind of making a jackass out of himself on Twitter. And the president is being engaged with that.
All right, fair enough. I appreciate that point, and I thank you. Sometimes it is true the president gets too engaged with these. Look, if as the president, his response to LeVar Ball being so ungrateful and justifying shoplifting, the president could tweet back and say, it's unfortunate that the young man's father believes shoplifting is okay and that it's not a major problem when you're in a communist dictatorship. Maybe he'll learn better from this. Something like that would be a lot better for a president to do than to directly go after him in a street fight, so to speak. Christine and Sharon. Hi, Christine. You're on WRKO,
Hi,
the voice of
Mike.
Boston.
Hi, Mike. Thank you for your show. My point is this. United we stand, divided we fall. These people are clearly not Americans. They are not lovers of the Constitution, and without the Constitution, without united we stand, divided we fall, in the system, it's pure anarchy. And that's my point.
What do you make of a father saying it's okay to shoplift when his son does it?
Well, I think it proves just what we're realizing. Nothing our president can do is right, and they're not Americans. You know, I'm going to support my president just like I would support and be loyal to, my family member, regardless of, they're in now, so let's help them. Bottom line, they're in the position. It's our obligation as Americans to help the unity of the country and to help our president. That's my point.
Christine, thank you for calling. Good to talk to you. Mike Siegel for Jeff Kuhner at the Voice of Boston, WRKO. What are your thoughts about this? At 617-266-6868, what about LeVar Ball saying that it was no big deal that his son shoplifted and that the president should have taken him on his own airplane and taken him home and he would have thanked him? Well, guess what? The president was going after that to Vietnam and the Philippines. He couldn't take him home, Mr. Ball. That's how ignorant you are about knowing what the president's itinerary was that was published all over the media. Maybe you ought to learn and start reading and start realizing what the law is, sir, with all due respect. 617-266-6868. Mike Siegel for Jeff Kuhner. Stay with us. It's 12:50. We're back at it. Coming up to 12:56. We go to your calls on LeVar Ball justifying shoplifting, saying it's not a big deal when his son shoplifted in China from Louis Vuitton. And those sunglasses are very expensive. But it doesn't matter how much it is. You could steal a pack of gum, shoplift, but it's still a crime. Might be petty larceny, petty theft, but it's still a crime. Steve, you're on with Mike Siegel for Jeff Kuhner at WRKO. Hello.
Good. How are you?
Fine.
All right. This LeVar Ball guy, I'm sorry. I got a 13-year-old. If he stole, I would, his butt. And
let's just say he wouldn't sit down for a few days, right?
Exactly. But for this guy to come out and say that Donald Trump, the President of the United States, the leader of the free world, should have brought him home on Air Force One, doesn't he have better things to do than be counting the spoons on that plane on the way home?
Well, he doesn't. He was going to Vietnam and the Philippines anyway. He wasn't even going home.
The kid's a thief. Why would he want a thief on the taxpayer's plane?
That's a good question. It would be inappropriate. And he was not going home anyway. He was going to Vietnam and the Philippines. But thank you for calling. And it's bizarre is what it is, that this guy, LeVar Ball, the son has more decency than the father. The son was contrite, appreciative, grateful, apologized, all of that. The father's like an arrogant individual who thinks crime is okay. Joan, you're on WRKO, the Voice of Boston. Hello.
Yes. I wondered, would it have been possible for Obama to have brought the Republicans to the Supreme Court when they refused to interview his nominee for the Supreme Court? Would it have been possible for him to do that?
We're not talking about that, but the answer is no. The Senate makes its own rules. Thank you for calling. The Senate makes its own rules with regard to the nominations. The Constitution gives the authority to advise and consent to the United States Senate. The House is kept out of that. And the Senate makes the rules about when it hears appointments and how it hears appointments. They have their own rules. So, no, you couldn't go to the Supreme Court because unless you change the Constitution, which obviously is not going to happen. We had Harry Reid break the filibuster rule in order to get federal judges appointed. And so all the Republicans did was to take that one step further. And as Reid went to the district court and appeals court level to break the filibuster rule, Mitch McConnell simply took it to the next step and broke the filibuster rule at the Supreme Court level in order to have Neil Gorsuch confirmed. And so that's now a new precedent, which is very important because Mr. Justice Kennedy is probably going to retire, and that will mean another appointment for President Trump, and that will mean that it will pass under present circumstances, hopefully, which means we'll have another conservative on the court, thank goodness. Mike Siegel here. Good to have you with us. We come back with much more at the Voice of Boston, WRKO.
The Voice of Boston is you. 680 WRKO Boston, 93.7 WEEI HD2 Lawrence, Boston. It's 1 o'clock.